So that's when I decided that, I'd been kind of, the first few months getting adjusted to med school, making sure, I was able to keep up with the work and everything. And that's when I decided, okay, maybe I should try and get some type of part-time job that would fit into my schedule.
Welcome everyone to the Student Loan Podcast. This is Shamil Rodriguez.
And I'm Daphne Vanessa.
And we have a great guest for you today from the medical profession, one of the frontline workers during COVID-19, doing more than just spending some of his time during his time off to share his story for the Student Loan Podcast and how he paid off his private student loan debt while being in med school and also maintaining a job while doing so. So Adam is a master of organization and his time, and I think that you're going to learn a lot from his lessons today.
Welcome to the Student Loan Podcast.
Here, you'll find practical advice on tackling student loan debt, paying down your higher education expenses,
and inspiring stories about paying off student loans. We're your hosts, Daphne Vanessa
and Shamil Rodriguez. So let's turn it over to Adam and take it away.
Hi guys. First off, thank you very much for having me. I guess I would say that, I'm certainly not an expert, but I feel like I have a story that a lot of people in my field can definitely relate to. Forgive me if I, get a few things, mixed up, but, I'll just tell my story and then hopefully we can, elaborate a little bit further. So I guess just starting off, I grew up, I'm one of five. I'm actually triplets. And so we grew up in northern New Jersey, and we didn't really have a plan in terms of where we wanted to go for undergraduate, college, how we were going to pay for it. It never really was discussed until it came that time to start applying to schools, and so I just knew that I did want to be a doctor, and so I tried to pick an undergraduate school that was, first of all, had a decent medical school that I could potentially go to. Didn't end up happening that way, but it was just the thought as a 17-year-old. And then also, one that was, fairly far away from home. I wanted to try and, experience different things, get out of my comfort zone, meet new people. So when it came down to applying for my undergraduate school, I actually just applied. I only applied to one school. I applied early decision. To Washington University in St. Louis. So it was nice. It was very simple. It wasn't, strenuous or anything. And then, thankfully I got in. It was great. I was so excited. And then, it really wasn't until after that point when I was like, oh, wait, it's private school. I know my two other brothers are also be going to college. Like, how are we going to pay for this? And so that was really the first time I started to think about student loans. I was very lucky. I applied for financial aid, and then I did end up getting a merit-based scholarship, which was essentially valued at, it was $100,000 over the 4 years. So it was essentially, so I was very fortunate, very fortunate. Yeah, so I basically had a full tuition scholarship for undergraduate. So thankfully, I really just had to focus on, covering the other costs, and so that, whether it was like room and board, food, just living around campus life, things like that. So, my freshman year, I think I had a small amount of government loans, a few $1,000s, and then I did take out a private loan. I think it was around $14,000. And then my sophomore year was a pretty similar scenario. I took out another loan worth around $12,000 in addition to other government loans. And then that's when I decided, okay, I've gotten adjusted to college life. Maybe I should try and minimize, some of my student loan burden. So I did end up getting a work study job. I had pretty strange work study jobs. I don't know, what other people have said in the past. I didn't really get a choice into what I did. I was, my first job was with one of the anthropology professors, and she had a bad case of carpal tunnel syndrome. So literally my job was typing in front of her computer while she was dictating. And so I did that for a semester. And then I worked in the archives. So I was an assistant archivist, which basically I was, very, very boring work where I just looked at old records, removed the staples, scanned it, and then, went back to work.
Historians appreciate you though.
Yeah, it's important. It's definitely important, but it's definitely not very exciting. Yeah.
No. Amazing. So can you talk to us about that $100,000 scholarship? How did you get that? What did you do in terms of actions? Was it merit-based? Was it need-based? What actions did you take to really get that huge scholarship amount?
Yeah, so I think there was definitely it was through the financial aid department, so it definitely was need based, and then they did make it clear to say that it was based on some of my merits as well, and I think the actual quantity maybe it may have been impacted by my overall financial need, and so I didn't have to necessarily apply for anything special or send in more paperwork or other than the usual routine financial aid stuff.
Nice. And then you said throughout your journey, you took out loans in undergraduate twice, right? One for 12,000, one for 14,000.
Yep.
Why were you taking out loans? What was the psychology behind that when you had the $100,000 scholarship?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously it's been a while now. It's been 15 years basically since I started my freshman year. But even then, WashU is, unfortunately, it's not a very cheap school. I think we had sort of estimated that like total cost would be around 50 grand or so per year. I think even staying in the dorm alone, and I was in like a really old, a tripled up room, was over $1,000 a month. So the expenses sort of added up, and I just didn't want to be in a position where I was left, in St. Louis with no money and, didn't have anywhere to go. So
Reasonable.
I figured, yeah.
Awesome.
So how did it work or help to be a triplet in that instance? Did it come up, or did you guys bounce ideas off each other as undergrads? Tell us a little bit about that experience.
Yeah, I would say we were all in fairly similar boats. We all went to different parts of the country. We all had to deal with financial aid, take out loans. My brother Jordan, who obviously you guys have met before, he was very aggressive at trying to seek out scholarship opportunities and really go above and beyond to try and minimize his student debt burden. I probably was a little less aggressive, I would say. I definitely sought out, work study jobs. I worked at the campus bookstore as well, to try and, get discounts on the books and things like that. And so, and then my brother who went to school in Florida, my brother Bradley, he actually worked pretty much a full-time job as a server through most of college. So we all had fairly similar stories, and we went back and forth on how we were trying to deal with our student debt. But while we were trying to minimize it, I think, maybe with the exception of Jordan, I wasn't really thinking about having to pay for it right away, just because I knew I would really be continuing school for a while. Wow.
So who are some of your influences when it comes to being motivated to pay off your student loans?
Yeah, obviously I would say, just looking at how my brother did it, I think he was very on top of it. He had a very strict budget, definitely with always planning ahead. He was probably a little bit more extreme, and so even though we were kind of doing it, I think he went to law school, I went to med school, so he sort of had one more year to think about things. So I was sort of following his lead a little bit. I thought. I still wanted somewhat of I would give up, some things, but not as much or as
right.
And so I think that he was helping me find sort of a middle ground, I would say.
Nice.
Okay. What were some of those sacrifices that were big for you, that were different, that you made during that process?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think, definitely one of the big things, a lot of my friends in college from home, even in med school and beyond, traveling is a pretty big thing. And so I would say I tried, I definitely had a lot of staycations where, or I stayed on campus and worked a little bit, or, that's not to say I didn't travel. I think I always wanted to study abroad, for example. And so instead of spending a whole semester abroad, I actually spent a summer abroad in Spain, which allowed something, a little bit of a cheaper option. And also, I felt would help, ultimately help on my application for medical school to show that I did this over the summer, which might have been something separating me from someone else. And then, I tried to find cheap ways to travel. So, I did in medical school, I went to Birthright, which is for those who don't know, it's basically a free trip to Israel for qualify. So, I mean, all expenses paid. So I mean, it's hard to refuse that. And then, I think, yeah, so I think, I made some sacrifices, but I didn't want to completely limit what I could do.
Mm-hmm.
Can you speak to the audience? I personally find this really interesting. Can you speak to the audience about Birthright and how that helped enhance your experience as a doctor now?
Yeah, I mean, I think, Birthright is mainly, it's hard to say if it's like a way of trying to get you interested in your culture, the country of Israel. And, I think other countries have something similar. I did it actually during medical school, and it wasn't necessarily, it was more just like a cultural immersion trip than anything else. But definitely it helps you look at how, other places in the world look at certain things. And, I actually met a couple of med students in Israel, and there are different experiences there where, most of the schools and education and even the jobs are sort of state or country run. And so it provided some different perspectives, definitely.
Do they speak about financial education at all? Is there any component about how you should manage your finances? Does that happen during the trip?
Oh, no, not in this.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's complete cultural immersion.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very interesting.
So where did you pick up some of your good habits? I know you had said that Jordan was really the strict one when it came to the budgeting and the sacrificing. Did you guys pick that up from your parents, or was it just good mentors while you were in school?
Yeah, I don't really have a good answer for that. I think we sort of just developed it on our own. I wouldn't say growing up we were ever like in the most frugal household or, money saving household. I mean, I think we always said like, some phrases that my grandparents would always say is if you don't ask, you don't get. So I think they would sort of try and like get a little bit more for, the same price or the same, it was always about bargaining. And so that type of mentality, I would say, was pretty strong. But, I wouldn't say we had a very strict budget in our family growing up.
Great. So I want to go into the specifics of student loans, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
And as comfortable as you're sharing, have you paid off all of your student loans yet by yourself, or have you had help? Where are you in your journey?
Yeah, sure. So I would say, in total between college and med school, I accrued about $40,000, I would say, in private loans. And then just in med school alone, it was around 220,000 in government loans. And then probably around 10,000 in government loans from undergrad. So I would say in total, I probably had around 270,000 in student loans.
Right.
So obviously, I definitely felt motivated to pay off the private loans first, just because, I didn't want to be dealing with, random banks and changing rules regarding interest rates and all the issues that come with that. So I made a very strong effort starting in med school to really pay most of my loans on time. And then, within the first couple years of residency and fellowship, I paid more down. And then finally, by the time I became an attending 1 year ago, is when I was able to really make the biggest dent in my student loans and ultimately pay off all of my private loans.
Wow.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
In 1 year, you paid off $40,000.
Yeah, pretty much. I would say, I probably paid off maybe a third of that before, just in the through residency and fellowship.
Oh, very good. Yeah.
The vast majority was this year. Yeah.
How did you manage that while in med school, right? Because we've gone to law school, totally different ball game. How did you manage to work and go to med school and focus on that? What was that process like?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's kind of crazy because, I mean, I don't think I expected to have to pay or make monthly payments on these private student loans while I was still technically a full-time student. And so definitely when I got, the information that was kind of expected of me, I sort of got a little like worried and shocked. So I think, I didn't want to take out more student loans to pay off old student loans. I felt like that probably didn't make sense financially. So I pretty much stuck to the maximum government loans that I could take out per year, which was $55,000. And then by the end of my first year of med school, I realized that, maybe that would be cutting it close. So that's when I decided that, I'd been kind of, the first few months getting adjusted to med school, making sure, I was able to keep up with the work and everything. And that's when I decided, okay, maybe I should try and get some type of part-time job that would fit into my schedule. And so,
So what did you end up doing then?
yeah, so basically, I went on the very reputable Craigslist. I found whatever job seemed reasonable enough, and it actually was working for a local tutoring company. And so from the end of my first year through the 4 years of medical school, I worked mainly as like a SAT, ACT prep tutor.
And you had time to do that while being in med school.
It was definitely hard. I think the good thing about that job versus like, working as a server or any other type of part-time job is that, the hours were very flexible. My boss at the tutoring company knew that, I had to study for exams, I would need time off, and they were very accommodating. And so, usually I would dedicate, maybe a couple Saturdays a month and then maybe 1 or 2 afternoons most weeks to help with the tutoring. And I would say total would be around 10 hours a week max, I would say, that I would take on. It's good and bad. I think I was kind of used to working some type of job and studying. So, I think doing that sort of helps me focus and stay on schedule. It does require more discipline, but I felt like if I wasn't working those 10 hours, I'd probably be channel surfing, watching Netflix. Like I'd find something to waste my time with. And whereas like now that I was working, I was like, okay, I'm working now. So then I have to, study later.
Well said. Well said. So total in student loans, you said you had around 275, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And then they were broken up. It sounds like most of them were government and that you had only 40,000. So I'm trying to do the math in my head. I'm terrible at arithmetic, but like under 25%, let's say under 20% were private loans, and most of them are government loans, right?
Correct.
So do you have a plan for tackling the government loans? Are you going to take the same approach that you've taken for these private loans?
Yeah, so I probably have taken a couple of missteps along the way, but I decided basically at the end of my med school, I was getting like so many emails, so many letters from like the different, even though they're all government loans, or like different organizations or whatever that were sending me mail about how much I owed, and so I made the decision to consolidate my loans actually, so that way it was all in one place and all together. I do think that because of that, I probably had a less favorable interest rate by then. And then I made the decision to do, just because, out of med school, even though we're pretty much guaranteed jobs out of most med schools, you're getting into residency, you're going to get a reasonably paid job. It's not going to be a great paying job for a while, but so I decided to do the income-based repayment plan, which I'm actually still a part of. And then I would say the good thing that has come around in the government recently that applies to most people in the medical field is public student loan forgiveness. So which hopefully, after 10 years of paying government loans, the rest will be forgiven. I mean, I am not at that point yet, so I can't say that that's definitely going to happen, but that's what I'm kind of hoping is going to happen. We'll have to see.
I see. So the strategy for a lot of people in med school is to work those 10 years at a hospital, which is technically a nonprofit, and because of that, get the public student loan forgiveness. That's very interesting. Yeah. Have you been concerned about some of the claims that people have reached the 10 years and not gotten paid?
Yeah, and, it's definitely concerning. I have a couple colleagues who are, I haven't actually interact with anyone who's been at that 10-year mark, but I definitely have a couple colleagues who are, a year or two ahead of me. And they've been very diligent about all the paperwork, making sure everything's up to date, everything's submitted, everything's cleared. But it is definitely a concern. And, it's concerning because, I felt like since residency and fellowship, when I've been making these small income-based repayments, my, total loan burden has actually gone up given the interest rate and stuff. So, I see the number go up and up and up, and I'm sort of not, making too much of a dent in it. So that's a little worrisome, but I'm hopeful, I have about 2.5 more years to go, and I'm hopeful by then most of the kinks will be figured out by that point. And so, I'm very optimistic. So we'll see.
It's awesome. And so for the loans that you did tackle for that 1 year, that huge $40,000 almost payment, did you go loan by loan, interest rate by interest rate, highest interest rate first, or did you go by smaller balance first?
Yeah. So first off, I should mention that. So the two private loans I took out during college, I actually had co-signers for both of them, of course, because I was, just basically a teenager. And I actually ran into issues with both co-signers. So that definitely impacted how and when I paid off each loan. For one co-signer, was my grandmother, who, was very nice in being a co-signer, but unfortunately she was older in age. And unfortunately, while I was paying off the loan, she did pass away. And so that was one, yeah. And so that was obviously one thing I didn't think about, dealing with, if someone on the loan that you co-signed, if they pass away, what's going to happen? Is the bank going to, there was certainly a risk of automatic default. And I know my brother was actually in a similar boat. And so I made more of a concerted effort to make it clear that I was making, slightly above, the minimum payments, and trying to be overly aggressive about paying that off. And then the other one was even more of an issue. So actually one of my co-signers, several years later, while I was, at the start of my residency, basically actually declared bankruptcy. And so with the stipulations of the loan, when they declared bankruptcy, my loan actually went into automatic default, which I didn't realize. I didn't even know what it was. I just tried to go on the loan website, one day to make my monthly payment, and there was nothing there. No record of me having a loan, no balance, nothing. And I was like, all right, this is a little weird. Maybe there's a glitch with the website. So I gave it a couple more days. I checked again, nothing. And so then I finally called, and they had told me, that actually it had been an automatic default, and that because of that, it was going directly to collections, and that there was nothing I could do until the collections agency actually came and talked to me. And so, I was getting nervous because, I was in residency. I didn't want it to affect my credit score. It wasn't, my doing, my issue. I was making on-time payments every month. And so finally, when the collection agency did contact me, they mentioned whatever the outstanding balance was. I think at the time was maybe around $8,000. And, I had to come up with another payment plan. And so it was a little bit more of an aggressive payment plan than I, was doing with the bank. But I agreed to it, obviously, because I didn't want to have any issues. And then, as soon as I got a decent amount of money, I basically just called the collection agency again. I think at that point I had around I think there was a $6,000 outstanding balance. And I basically had, a little bit under that. I had around $4,500 available. I got a nice tax refund check, and I want to just deal with, be done with it. And I was actually able to negotiate a settlement where I gave them $4,500, and they sort of just forgot about the remaining $1,500. And so, so even though, I had to deal with a lot of issues with that, I potentially saved some money, I think. And over time, there was a decrease in accrued interest just because I was able to give a lump sum that was less than the outstanding balance. And so that worked out. But it was definitely some stress I didn't need to worry about.
Yeah, speaking of dealing with that type of stress, that's a very interesting way to learn a hard lesson, right? You wish that you could learn that in a PowerPoint presentation and say, okay, this is what happens when this happens, right? But real life doesn't work that way all the time. So in that instance, can you share with the listeners how you coped with that experience, right? Because that can be very stressful, and it can be very distracting, and can impact someone's performance at work, can impact their performance at school. Can you go into some of one, how you felt when you were dealing with it, and then how you overcame it and kind of worked your way through it?
Yeah, I tend to think that I'm a fairly laid back person. I don't try to let things bother me too much, but I would say that definitely led to a lot of sleepless nights. I was very stressed out about it. I was just getting I was like a fairly new resident, living in New York City, expensive place to live, obviously. Already dealing with these other loans, and now, a collections agency was calling me. I mean, what's going on? This is bizarre. And, I didn't really, it's not like I had anyone really who had a similar experience. I just talked it with my family. I'm lucky to have, brothers in the legal profession. I tried to I say weighed my options. I actually, a couple of years down the line, I got, my brother to send a nice legal letter, just verifying that everything was okay. So that certainly helped. But yeah.
Very helpful.
So it sounds like you really leaned on your tribe. You leaned on the folks that were around you, the resources that you had to kind of help you get through that. When it comes to, I want to make sure that we really use this opportunity to have you, especially as a doctor who works in a very high pace, high stress environment. Can you help some of the other listeners that are out there today that are in the medical profession or just in another stressful, high paced field? How did you manage? What were some of those organization techniques or tactics that you used to manage that workload of when you were tutoring and med school and et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, so absolutely. I always say, I think I was probably one of the few people in my medical school who actually had a part-time job. I don't know if that's true or not, but just based on between my friends and who I knew, I was probably one of the few people who actually had a part-time job. And so I would say because of that, I did sacrifice some, I was not going to be the valedictorian of my medical school class, and I was okay with that. I did not want to be. I wasn't shooting for a super competitive residency or medical field, and so knowing that, I felt more comfortable pursuing a part-time job. And they kept saying throughout our orientation, oh, what do you call a person who finishes at the bottom of their medical school? And it's a doctor. You still call them a doctor. So I was like, as long as I pass everything, I don't need to repeat anything. I was just going to be okay doing this job. And I don't want people to think that I'm not a good doctor or have some knowledge gaps because I took this part-time job. I don't think it affected me too much. But definitely, I had I would outline regularly, time slots of, okay, from 1 p.m. to 2:30, I'm going to do some reading. From 3 to 5, I have 2 tutoring sessions. And then from, after dinner, I was going to do some practice questions for, my upcoming exam. So I always made sure, pretty much during the week, I had a very strict schedule. And then, on the weekend, I had a little bit more leeway. But definitely during the week, I had pretty much an hour by hour or even sometimes 30-minute time frame for each thing.
So to follow up on that, I know that is difficult to maintain, like you were saying there, right? To have that hour by hour breakdown. Did you find yourself falling off the wagon sometimes and saying, hey, I'm not doing this, I'm not doing that? Did you have a way to correct yourself? What was your self-correcting mechanism?
Yeah, so, I would say the good thing about being an SAT and ACT tutor prep is, I don't know how this is going to sound, but if I was falling a little bit behind in some of my med school work, I would sort of be, okay, guys, here's 10 practice questions. Why don't you work on these 10 practice questions, and then we'll go over them afterwards. And so while they were working on their practice questions, I was sort of doing mine. And then, rather than just sitting there, staring at them while they did these questions, I'd sort of be using that extra time to catch up.
That is smart. So, you're helping them because they have to do reps and sets for whatever they're practicing anyway. So
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So what about, talk to us about what your pace is like now. COVID, I'm assuming, has changed things a lot for you, especially with pulmonology, right? So let's just give, I guess we want to take advantage of the opportunity of you being such a unique guest to talk and being in this environment to speak about what your pace is like now and how has that impacted you with how, trying to manage your student loans and everything else that you have going on.
Yeah, obviously, no one really saw, the last few, we didn't get specific training in any of this, last few months. Obviously,
you didn't get COVID training?
Oh man.
Yeah, we didn't know, that these things were going to spring up, and we would have to, obviously, I think just my prior work experience and the field that I chose, it's, I was sort of used to this, fairly busy environment at all times. So, I do primarily pulmonary and critical care. So I mainly spend most of my time in the intensive care units. And then I think they've been very good about, at the end of the day, it is somewhat shift work, similar to how the nurses work and all the other first-time workers in the hospital, what their shifts are like. When we're there, we're working hard. We're doing our work from, usually our shift is 7 to 7 or 8 to 8, depending on, what our shifts may be that week. And then, come that time though, at the evening, we're done. We're out of there. So, they've been very good about, I have, definitely at the height of the pandemic, I was staying late, but they really tried to minimize, how long we were staying there for. And so we were never there, 3 or 4 days at a time. We would be off 2 days to catch up and get some rest, and then we'd be back. So, I think definitely dealing with the stress. I will say something good with the government loans, right? I think because of these extreme times, they actually have we haven't had to make actually monthly payments on the student loans that are through the government. So since I accidentally paid a payment on March, but since then before I figured that out. But from April through now, really, I haven't actually made any real payments on my government student loans, and that's really what's helped me pay off my private loans. Up to this point.
Very nice.
So I wanted to switch gears for a moment. When it comes to the student debt diaries, as some of our listeners may know, and as Adam had referenced before, we had his brother Jordan, or his would you just, because I'm so used to hearing twins, triplet brother, all right, on a few episodes back. What and he has spoken high volumes about your articles that you've written for the Student Debt Diaries. Can you give the listeners a little bit about that, so maybe they can check out some of your articles?
Yeah. So, I would say I'm not like being a medical person, I'm not like a natural writer, but, I try to just talk, in my voice and just, describe a story. And so, I felt that, obviously Jordan, when he started Student Debt Diaries, wanted to be provide an outlet for people of all types who have student loans to come and learn a little things. But obviously, he's from the legal profession, he's a lawyer. And so he really thought it would be worth it to have something from the medical perspective. I think as doctors, we tend to keep a lot of things in, and we don't, necessarily, show everything right off the bat. And so he thought that if I, wrote a couple articles about my experience on the Student Debt Diaries website, that would help, bring readers to light what's going on in sort of what we deal with on the regular. And so I think I've written, I haven't written anything in a while, but I think I've written a total of 9 articles about my experiences with student loans.
Okay. And now, is there any experience in particular that you think would be helpful for our audience? Very similar to Jordan's mission or objective of trying to shed some light for somebody who's out there who's really struggling, or just wants to hear an inspirational story from somebody else that might be in this similar situation.
Yeah, I think one of the things I had to do to try and minimize my student debt burden, I talked about in one of the articles, was I actually chose to live at home for part of my med school. So my dad actually was living in South Florida at the time when I applied to medical school. And so I used that basically to try and get into a Florida-based medical school, just by applying as an in-state resident. And so, by living at home, I just spent 4 years away, from a 2-hour plane ride away from him. And so now I was getting, I sort of, when you first move back home, you sort of act like your angsty teenage self again. And so, I definitely had to swallow my pride a little bit to move back home. But that being said, I saved a lot of money. I mean, I think at least $1,000 a month, I estimate, just, dealing, worrying about rent and utilities and everything. So, I don't think there's any shame in anyone choosing to live at home, whether during school, after school, and beyond, just to try and save money and get their financial security in check. I think that's a very important thing.
Nice.
That is a smart move.
I'd like to rewind a little bit, if that's okay.
Sure.
I want to go back to the journey that is left. So we have still Dr. Adam Rothman. We still have federal loans that will be paid. What is the makeup of that? And do you plan on taking advantage of the CARES Act provisions to pay it off while there's zero interest?
So, I would say the vast majority of my loans are unsubsidized. I think, vast majority, I think more than probably 3/4. And, I think it is right now, obviously they've frozen some of the interest down, but before this pandemic, it was fairly high interest around, I think somewhere in the 6 range. Which definitely adds up, especially when you have the big numbers that I unfortunately have. But I think what's good about, and why I chose my specific field is that, rather than working, at a private practice, doing my own thing as a doctor, I chose to work at a hospital, in a big health organization, because I knew that did qualify as a not-for-profit, and that would help me potentially avoid, being super aggressive about needing to pay off all of my student loans. That being said, I'm sort of, I graduated medical school in 2013, so I'm 7 years out now, and I know student loan forgiveness program, the time frame would be around 10 years. Yeah, so I'm almost there. So from my view, I'm not necessarily in a rush to pay down my balance. I don't think I'm gonna be able to pay down my balance before those 3 years are up. So I don't feel the need to pay more than the minimum.
Smart.
And I think a lot of my coworkers, a lot of residents and fellows are in a similar situation. I think, speaking with them about it, they're all doing the same thing more or less.
Nice. So it sounds like the working for a major hospital nonprofit organization is a great way to, because you're going to do your residency anyways. That takes so many years.
Yeah.
By the time you start making real doctor money, why not just have it, forgiven? That's a great strategy. So unfortunately, we don't have that in the law, but
it's hard.
Wait, why are law firms considered nonprofits?
I know law firms. You can do it, but there is no transition to like large pay at a nonprofit. So if you work for legal aid, you work for legal aid. But it's definitely not the same. So that's a really interesting strategy that I think a lot of our listeners who are doctors or in med school can really benefit from. So you're not interested, from a guest, in the amortization schedule, right? Doesn't matter. Not really an issue, because in 3 years you're probably getting clear papers.
Hopefully.
That's really nice.
Yes.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
So in terms of what strategy you used in the past, would you categorize it as making more money, reducing your expenses, or a combination of both?
Yeah, I tried to definitely, I would say a combination of both. I wanted to have some type of part-time job to sort of use that as like my, daily fund for whatever I want to do, whether I wanted to eat, travel, do whatever. And then, I sort of used my loans to pay for, my tuition primarily. And then that meant, obviously having a tight budget, but then, really trying to have some type of financial security by working the part-time job. One regret I would say is I did take out one private loan at the end of my medical school.
Okay.
And it was just they advertised it as like a relocation loan, and like, it was not a good idea. I wouldn't recommend it for anyone. It was a very high interest rate. And as soon as I could, I like paid it off right away. So I would sort of avoid that at all costs. I would just maybe try and, I don't know, maybe work a few extra hours a week for a little while to, really, I probably didn't need that loan anyways. It was more just, I was nervous, running out of money before I started residency, essentially.
Sure. Can we delve into the life of a doctor during COVID for a little bit? What is it like to work for those 24-hour shifts, right? I know you said most of the time it's 12-hour shifts, but sometimes you have 24-hour shifts. Is that still true?
Yeah, so we were lucky, I worked some occasional 24-hour shifts, just in my daily or in my, monthly schedule. We don't really have any, as residents and fellows, we sort of have, very specific duty hours that are like guidelines, where you can only work more than 80 hours per week, just based on, because the risk of a tired doctor, causing a medical error is very high. So, I will say, So I would say, as an attending, unfortunately, we don't have those protections. And
Right.
Definitely at the start of the pandemic, especially here in New York City, it got very busy very quickly. And so basically it was pretty much all hands on deck, like right from the get-go. So, after about a week or two, obviously a lot of us were getting pretty tired. We were lucky where when the pandemic got very bad in New York City, it was not as bad elsewhere in the country. And so we were fortunate to have a lot of doctors really from around, all over the country come and help out, whether on volunteer or paid basis. And so for the most part, they actually handled most of our night shifts. So we did get to go home, in the evening. We did get to, sleep at home, relax, a couple of days a week. So, it was handled pretty well. It'll be interesting to see, as it's hopefully not going to be too much or as extreme this time around as it was back in March, April. Just because, the rest of the country is sort of having to deal with it at this point as well.
Interesting. And so do you have a family, Adam?
Nope, just me.
So there's no self-quarantine when you come home after, right?
No, I think obviously I live in like a elevator building, in a large apartment complex. And so, obviously I try not to come home in scrubs because, it's definitely at the height of the pandemic. Even if I was wearing clean scrubs on my way home and in the elevator, I was getting weird looks.
Oh, wow.
Looks, people don't, they don't know what's on those scrubs, even if they're clean, but definitely, and it's still a routine. Every time you come in, you take your shoes off, you take, all the outside layer of clothes off, and you just, drop it and put it in the hamper and let it be. And make sure you're clean. But thankfully, I would say, protective equipment works because, very few of us actually got sick. So, we've all been tested multiple times. And so I would say everyone should wear a mask for sure at the very least.
Thank you. I don't know what the future holds with this health crisis. Do you have any insight into that for our audience? I know it's not directly related to the student loan podcast, but if we're not alive, ladies and gentlemen, we can't pay our student loans. So I'm taking advantage to have great advice from a pulmonologist.
Yeah. The positive thing is that with people wearing masks now, I think, especially in the close quarters and outside areas, I think we will see a reduction in flu cases in general. And obviously, even though with COVID-19 on the news, people still do die from the flu as well. So I think, hopefully that'll be the one positive. The other thing is living in New York City, the subways get cleaned every day, 1 to 5 a.m.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder, how
why were they doing that before?
What was going on before? People are maybe washing their hands once in a while now when they go to the bathroom or anything. So I think people are going to be more conscious of how they approach others. How even personal hygiene I think has become a big issue. And I think it'll be interesting to see if a vaccine comes out. How many people take it right off the bat? Are we going to trust that the first vaccine that comes out is safe and effective? I don't know. I think time will tell. I'm sure, if a reliable vaccine does come out at some point, next year, I think that's probably the realistic time frame. But, I'm sure, we'll have to be one of the first people to try it out, just being exposed to patients all the time. So I personally will take it if it's safe, but, I think we'll have to review the data before that happens.
Definitely. And what are you looking for in the data to know whether or not a vaccine is safe?
Yeah, so I think a couple of these vaccine trials have ended early or paused just because there have been some unexplained symptoms, or I think there was some neurological outcomes in one study. And so I mean, certainly a vaccine shouldn't really give you any symptoms. So if there are any symptoms, I don't know what they're injecting people with, but I think certainly you should, other than some soreness in the affected area of the injection site, I think that should be the most severe symptom. And so I think anything else, I would be a little skeptical. And that being said, we want to make sure, even when people get the flu vaccine, it's still possible to get some strain of the flu. So, is it similar with COVID-19? How effective will these vaccines be? it's likely not going to be 100% effective. So I think, the key thing will still be to, even if you get the vaccine, you still have to practice social distancing, wear masks, be cautious.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So life is never going to go back to normal.
Yeah, it's hard to say. I think the only thing to relate is, with the SARS outbreak, in the early 2000s. And I think even to this day, a lot of people in the wintertime, in that area of the world still wear masks just, out of precaution. And so, I think at least in the foreseeable future, I think the majority of people will and perhaps should be wearing masks, even after this winter season, I would say. Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Wow. I think I just have to take that in for a little bit. I was hoping that we would go back to normal, but it looks like I'm wearing a hazmat suit to the airport again.
Yeah, no, I definitely, I've not traveled on an airplane since the pandemic. I traveled in early March, and that was the last time. And then, I can't imagine, I'd be nervous, just with the sheer amount of people in airports and, planes being in enclosed space, even if the air is circulated and filtered. Can't be 100% sure. Yeah.
You know what? But how are you getting to the hospital now? Are you taking the subway? Are you Uber or Lyft or?
Yeah. So I mean, the main hospital I work at, thankfully, is only about 2 or 3 blocks from where I live. So
nice.
yeah. So I walk, obviously, and then one of the hospitals I work at, I do have to take the subway. One of the nice things but it's rare, and I usually just wear a mask when I'm on the subway. And then one of a nice perk that's come about from the health system during the pandemic is we all got yearly subscriptions to the city bike service in New York City. So we get we can sort of ride those bikes for free. So it's, a good way to get from places and stay healthy. So I've been using that a little bit as well.
Oh, very nice. Smart. Good move.
Yeah.
All right. So do you want to move into the
rapid round?
Rapid round. All right, Adam.
Right.
So we're going to throw some questions at you, and you got to give us your impulse or your fastest response. Okay.
All right. Sure.
Okay.
How old were you when you paid off your private student loans?
Private student loans. So I would say 31.
Nice.
Do you still have your private student loan payoff letters?
I have the one that went to the collections. I definitely saved that, and I wanted to put it into plaque, but right now it's in the accordion binder. But I have that one. The other ones I have like PDFs that are saved in my Google Drive. Yeah.
Nice.
Got it. Good smart.
Beautiful. What was the first thing you did after paying off your private student loans?
Honestly, not much. Because I was like, all right, now I can start saving for other things. So I don't, it was just, rediverting that money, elsewhere.
Okay. What is one piece of advice you have for students contemplating whether to take out student loans?
Yeah, I would say if you have a dream and you have a goal in mind, and student loans are going to be the way to achieve that, then go for it. I wouldn't, worry. I wouldn't avoid going or applying to a certain school or going to graduate school just because you're worried about student loans. I would say just go for it, but just understand that you need to have a plan to pay it off.
Okay. And so I guess the same advice goes for if you have children in the future, for them to pursue education regardless of the possibility of getting student loans.
Absolutely. But, I will say, that being said, if you're offered a full ride somewhere, and you want to go somewhere else, may nudge you into the,
There you go. Yeah. Don't go out of your way to find student loans.
Yeah.
Nice.
All right. So last one, Adam, if you had one piece of, or, if you had a quote that you wanted the world to remember you by after you've been long gone from planet Earth, what would that be?
Oh,
It's like those random interview questions that you get.
I would just say, live your life. Don't let anything hold you back. Work hard to try and make whatever your goals and aspirations are come true.
Nice.
Very well said.
Love it. Well, thank you so much for joining us. We had a great conversation. Thank you for your service. Thank you for saving lives. We really appreciate it. We need more doctors like you in the profession, saving lives. So we want to say thank you.
Thank you
Adam.
very much. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
All right. Take
All
care.
right. Take care.
Thank you for joining us today on the Student Loan Podcast. If you want to learn more details about the topics that were discussed today, visit the podcast show notes at thestudentloanpodcast.com. That's thestudentloanpodcast.com. Thank you, and we'll see you soon.